Dana White is one of the most polarizing figures in sports right now. Either you love him or you hate him. He's considered the greatest promoter in the history of combat sports. Yet his own mother called him a, quote, vindictive tyrant. He's one of the pioneers that helped grow the UFC from $2 million to over $11 billion. Meanwhile, he's promoting a new sport that he claims is bigger than every other sport in the world combined.
I said, this will be the biggest sport in the world. This will be bigger than the UFC.
Said sport can't secure a TV deal, is being ripped apart by journalists, medical professionals, and is so disliked by UFC fans that there's speculation on whether or not it's a money laundering scheme. He's given away tons of cash to random influencers, yet insists UFC fighters shouldn't earn more money.
You don't like the way we pay our fighters? Too fucking bad.
Dana White and the UFC have been involved in endless controversies. Dana has on multiple occasions just blatantly lied and has never once had to answer for it. Yet he and the UFC always seem to come out on top. So is Dana White truly a bad guy, or is he the product of a cutthroat business world that demands profit over any morals or ethics? Let's go back to the beginning to find out.
I don't give a f.
Born in Manchester, Connecticut, Dana White didn't have the best of childhood. An alcoholic father led to White being raised by a single mother in a low-income household. To turn this into a $500 million net worth is impressive, and to this day, White expresses he doesn't regret anything. While he's an East Coaster by birth, he spent some of his high school years in Las Vegas, where he'd get in contact with Lorenzo Fertitta and his older brother, Frank Fertitta. While the two weren't close at the time, they later reconnected at a wedding after high school. The Fertittas were sons of Frank Fertitta Jr., who owns Station Casinos. If you weren't aware, casinos are basically money printers, especially when you own 17 of them.
So we're down 135,000, actually maybe a little bit more.
Point being, they're currently billionaires. At the time, they were in a place to buy the UFC for $2 million. Nowadays, that is insane to think about, but here's some context. When the Fertittas bought the UFC, they spent $2 million for an octagon and the name. That's it. So they bought it out and made Dana White the president, which he still is to this day. $12 billion out of $2 million. You gotta step on a few toes and be brutal in terms of business. And with Dana White as the public face of the UFC, he is the one who knocks. It's possible Dana White learned some of his brutal business techniques by working with the Fertittas, as they knew the notoriously clean and non-controversial business operations of Vegas and casinos. One of the key strategies of Vegas seems to be the power of propaganda. Dana White is a master of the soundbite, for better or for worse. He has said some wild stuff throughout the course of his career.
Stitch Duran was never my friend, you know? And Stitch Duran, another thing about Stitch Duran, saying that I should have called him.
It's hard to tell when Dana White says some insane shit. Is he saying it on his own accord, or is somebody else telling him to say what he's saying? The problem with this is every time you hear him speak, his intentions are completely obfuscated. It's incredibly hard to take his words at face value, especially when he says stuff like this.
The deal that I just cut for Slap is bigger than the UFC deal we cut with Spike TV after the first season of The Ultimate Fighter.
Where there are no morals as long as there's money to be made. Dana will just bold-faced lie while talking to reporters, and it's not lying where it's like, well, maybe that's true, I doubt it, but I can't really prove it. That happens constantly. It's stuff that either turned out to later not be true, or stuff you can literally look up in 5 seconds. Like how the UFC would never co-promote. Bruh. Him saying nobody is a bigger fan of Demetrius Johnson than he is.
When he was here, I was defending him from the fans,
right.
You know? So who's defended Demetrius Johnson more than me? The bottom line is Demetrius Johnson is in line right now. You know, first of all, when he did his deal, he didn't want pay-per-view. Right. He didn't want pay-per-view, he wanted upfront money, no pay-per-view. He wasn't very confident in his abilities to sell pay-per-views. He has the lowest selling pay-per-view in the history of the UFC.
The UFC will never work with EA.
We went to EA and we talked to them about it. EA said specifically, straight up, first of all, they wouldn't even take a meeting with us. They wouldn't take a meeting with us, number one. Number two, they said, this isn't a real sport, these aren't real athletes, and we'd never do a game like this. So our game comes out, makes a bunch of money, and look at EA. Now they want, now it's a real sport, isn't it? And these are real athletes, EA sucks.
Women will never fight in the UFC. Power Slap has more views than the entire sports world. Don't worry, we'll come back to that one. It's like his word means nothing, but at the same time, he repeats narratives over and over again, likely with the hope that nobody questions it. A classic tool of propaganda, just repeat the same thing until people believe it. But if it is propaganda, what's the goal? Think about it like this. Every time Dana says something, it usually has to do with some sort of business move. What would fit our narrative to make the most money right now? Whether it's a lie directed at investors or to talk down his competition. You could probably play him a literal contradiction that he's made and he'll just move on like nothing happened. Anyone who dares question Dana on the things he said in the past will have their media pass quickly revoked by the UFC. If it is financially beneficial for the UFC and himself at the time, that is what the narrative is going to be, regardless of any objective truths. Dana also has this way of talking that is a mixture of a bully and a Redditor, which is absolutely infuriating as a listener.
As an educated adult who knows the fight business, you cannot deny that while John Jones is active, he is the greatest fighter in the world.
You'll see this way of speaking from lots of people these days, especially if they hold any sort of clout.
You f***ing idiot, you stupid American hog pig f***er.
It's the idea that if you disagree with me, you have no clue what you're talking about. You must be stupid, regardless of how nuanced or subjective said topic is. It's the equivalent of saying cookie dough ice cream is the best. Okay, uncontroversial. But then you add, if you disagree with me, you're a moron and don't know what you're talking about. But then again, it's hard to take Dana at his word when you think, what is the real agenda here? This is the key strategy to the politician. Never admit you're wrong, never acknowledge your faults, and never apologize. This is a terrible strategy to be liked by your peers, but to run a cutthroat business and maintain power, it works very well. But want to make Dana uncomfortable? Ask him about fighter pay. Dana has been at the helm of the UFC while it's made some of the most fighter-unfriendly moves possible, which is odd considering without the fighters, you literally don't have the UFC. Predatory contracts that start at $12K to show up, and if you win, another $12K. $24K maximum for an early fighter. But keep in mind, they have to pay gym fees, medical expenses that occur during training. Yet Dana White is happy to give a Nelk boy $250,000. Fighters get paid what they deserve, they're greedy, and people can make millions from MMA. But is that really true?
I'm broke, so I need to fight.
Everybody acts like this is a fucking career. This isn't a career. This is not a career. This is an opportunity.
The highest fight purse for a boxer was $285 million for Floyd Mayweather, but he's an outlier. Let's use some other boxers for a more fair comparison. $44 million for Canelo, $99 million for Anthony Joshua, and $25 million for Triple G. Now let's look at the highest fight purse for the most famous UFC fighter ever, Conor McGregor, $3 million. But Conor's a multi-millionaire, and with the allegations of Conor making most of his money through whiskey, it's very deceptive to think that the only reason he's currently rich is because of the UFC. This is also an outlier. If you look at the average UFC champion, they make around $500,000 to $1 million per fight. $500,000 is less than the minimum contract in the NHL. Compared to literally any other pro athlete at the highest level, this is insulting pay. Why can the UFC do this though? Because they're basically a monopoly on MMA? Sure, that's true. But by that logic, aren't the NFL, NBA, and other leagues a monopoly too? Kind of, but they have players' unions to help negotiate the contracts. The UFC has crushed any attempt at a fighter union to maximize profits. The average sports league usually does between a 55-45 split between the league and the players. The UFC does a split that's around 80-20, maybe 85-15. If you want a whole video diving into this, check out this video by TJ Loves Fights that explains just how predatory the whole operation is. But we're here to talk about Dana. Dana is very careful to not say the UFC is a job, but an opportunity.
This isn't a career. This is not a career. This is an opportunity.
Listen, we can't afford to increase fighter pay or bonuses because they don't deserve it.
There's an argument that maybe you should just up them to...
I think tonight showed that we should not. No. Upping them doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anybody fight any harder. It doesn't change anything. I'm not doing this again. Ever. Today was the last day that I'm doing that.
Despite Dana bragging nearly every event that this is the highest gate ever, the pay-per-views are going crazy, it's all sold out.
Highest attended UFC event in UK history. The gate was 5 million. Gate was 7.25 million, highest grossing gate. in the arena's history.
The fighter bonuses are $50,000 a night, and they have not been adjusted for inflation. If any fighter dares ask for better conditions in a contract, they'll be erased from UFC history. And Dana will also badmouth you publicly, saying you were scared to fight, or you don't like the challenge, you just care about money and not competition. And this applies to any fighter, including the UFC heavyweight champion, Francis Ngannou. Born in a village in Cameroon, Francis took an interest in boxing at a young age, where there was basically no opportunity to fight for his home continent, let alone home country. So Francis had to take a journey that is straight out of a movie. He leaves the sand mines of Cameroon, which he'd been working at since he was 9 years old, to pursue his dream in boxing.
I'm not just gonna survive in the life. I'm gonna live. I'm gonna chase the dream.
This meant getting to France somehow. After crossing the Sahara Desert, spending 2 months in prison for illegally crossing the Spanish border, and almost dying a few times, he arrived in Paris with no money, friends, or shelter, sleeping on park benches when he first got there. This is a story that could be a movie and people wouldn't believe it. For a 9-year-old sand mine worker in Africa to become the heavyweight champion of the world is absolutely ridiculous. And the UFC knew this. When Francis finally arrived in the UFC, it was fireworks. And Dana knew it. Francis, combined with his backstory, intimidating 6'6", 250 pounds of muscle physique, and insane knockout power, had the full backing of the UFC PR machine. Shown by this now infamous press conference given by Dana White himself, where he claimed Francis literally hits like a truck.
Francis Ngannou has the world record for the most powerful punch. His punch is the equivalent to 96 horsepower, which is equal to getting hit by a Ford Escort going as fast as it can. And it's more powerful than a 12-pound sledgehammer swung full force from overhead. Holy shit.
Despite being perhaps the most intimidating fighter in UFC history, Francis was inexperienced, and it showed when he fought for the title. He got dominated and lost to the greatest heavyweight ever, Stipe Miocic. After this fight, Dana took a total 180 on Francis. Instead of praising the guy he fought or simply remaining indifferent, saying he's inexperienced, he took a shit all over him with stuff that's yet to even be confirmed today.
I think his ego ran away with him, big time. I can tell you that his ego absolutely did run away with him. I had some personal encounters with him, as did other people in the organization, and this guy's ego just was so out of control. It's like, before the Stipe fight, he took off and went to France. Ego is what hurt Francis Ngannou.
And knowing Dana's track record with the truth, I'm not sure if any of this exactly holds water. It didn't help that Francis had one of the worst fights ever, literally right after that.
It's funny, leading up to this fight, I said, there's no way this fight could be anything other than chaos. It's definitely possible that I was wrong.
So the UFC and Dana completely detached themselves from the Francis Ngannou hype train. Who even is that guy? However, after this, Francis went on what can only be described as a generational run. He fought 4 different guys, knocking them all out in the first round with an average fight time of 40 seconds. Even though Dana and the UFC had taken a collective dump on him, there was basically nobody else worthy of fighting for the title. Plus, Stipe would easily beat Ngannou again, right?
Nice counter right from Miocic, who is now down and out. Francis Ngannou can finally call himself the greatest heavyweight in the world.
Francis Ngannou, the former golden child turned outcast of the UFC, is now the champion. He had the negotiating power, and he knew it. So he went to war with the UFC and Dana after this because, unlike before, he had all the leverage. The UFC responded by asking him to defend his title literally 2 months later. For context, this is an insane turnaround for a fighter, let alone a champion. Usually a fight camp is 10 weeks long. But also, Francis literally couldn't fight in America in the next 2 months because his visa expired.
So you had your contract extended in the midst of this while you had a visa issue that precluded you, that stopped you from traveling back to the US to train and to compete.
Yeah, not to mention that they have to give me at least time to maybe go home and introduce the belt for my people.
So Dana took this extremely well. The UFC made an interim title fight, then Francis fought the winner. Francis also refused to sign a new contract, meaning he was fully gambling on himself. So he went out there and won. Now, regardless of the winner of a title fight, Dana always puts the belt around them. But with Francis, Dana couldn't do it. He was there that night, but for some reason, he wasn't in the octagon.
Because there was stuff going on backstage that I was dealing with, but You know, for anybody to think that I was showing any type of disrespect toward Francis, I saw Francis all week, you idiots.
Ironic that he used to accuse Francis of having ego problems. They tried to negotiate after this, but Dana claimed Francis wanted way too much money.
And he feels like he's in a position right now to fight lesser competition for more money.
They apparently offered him the most money in heavyweight history, which was turned down by Francis. But Francis says he wanted things more than money, including health insurance for all fighters and the ability to box outside the UFC. But no, clearly this man just doesn't want to fight. What's weird is the super fight the UFC wanted was with Jon Jones, who many consider the greatest fighter of all time, versus Francis Ngannou. But after Francis won the title, Dana said this.
If I'm Jon Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
All of a sudden, Francis is gone. Dana starts saying this.
Francis didn't want to fight Jon Jones. Jon Jones is the scariest, most badass fighter of all time.
Look, obviously he's not going to big up a guy who just walked out on him. What's been interesting is the complete erasure of Francis Ngannou from UFC history. After he left the UFC claimed this guy was the only Cameroonian in UFC history, or literally cutting him out of promotional clips.
But then him discrediting me, Francis Ngannou, Kamaru Usman. But then him discrediting me, Kamaru Usman.
This, accompanied with all the stuff Dana has said, just shows Dana is the mouth of the UFC and can control the narrative even if he's lying about it. He's even since made the ridiculous claim that Francis made more money in the UFC than he did in boxing. And I'm not sure what's the sadder part of that lie, the fact that Francis has 14 UFC fights and only 2 boxing fights, or the fact that he made more from those 2 boxing fights. But clearly Francis was just scared of Jon Jones, right? Wait, did someone say Jon Jones? Jon Jones.
Jon Jones is undefeated in the UFC. Jon Jones is the pound for pound best fighter in the world and the greatest fighter fucking ever.
It's just, guys, let me explain something to you. Jon Jones is a whole nother. Jon Jones is.
When you talk about who's the baddest dude in the world, you put 2 guys in a room and who walks out? Jon Jones walks out of the fucking room every time. And listen to me, I'm not defending Jon Jones.
Dana really seems to love Jon Jones, but what he leaves out is Jon Jones has a bunch of asterisks on his MMA career. He's probably the most controversial MMA fighter ever. Some of his controversies include taking steroids multiple times, testing positive for cocaine, getting UFC events rebooked on a few days' notice, or getting them canceled through his own actions.
Is this guy gonna mess this up again by doing steroids or snorting cocaine or sandblasting prostitutes? What's this guy gonna do? What's this guy gonna do to mess this up this time?
Prostitutes. I beat you after a weekend of cocaine.
Hitting a pregnant woman with his car and fleeing the scene.
Jon Jones?
Assaulting his wife and getting arrested multiple times. Yet despite all the headaches he's caused for the UFC, Dana White can absolutely not get this man's out of his mouth. Jon Jones was originally planned to fight Francis Ngannou way back in the day, which undoubtedly would have been one of the biggest fights ever. But due to contract disputes with the UFC regarding both Jon and Francis, this never happened. Now let me explain something to you. The UFC has a pound for pound list. Basically, the whole concept is regardless of weight class, who is the best fighter in the world? This is typically based on recent wins, level of competition, win streak, and activity. Fans pretty much unanimously agree that the list should be number 1 Islam Makhachev and number 2 Alex Pereira. It just so happens that these 2 guys are some of the biggest stars in the sport. So what happens when Dana White is asked about the potential of these guys to be all-time greats?
Yep. Just to go back to Islam, he's now on a 14-fight winning streak, which is the 3rd longest in history behind Anderson Silva and Usman. What would it take for him to surpass Jon Jones in your mind for that pound-for-pound number 1?
I mean, when you think about what pound for pound really means.
Right? He fought Volkanovski, who's a weight class lower than him. Jon Jones beat everybody at light heavyweight, then beat the best heavyweight in the division like it was nothing at a higher weight class. Jon Jones is absolutely positively the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, probably the greatest fighter of all time in any sport. When you talk about who's the baddest dude in the world, you put 2 guys in a room and who walks out, Jon Jones walks out of the fucking room every time. No question about it. And in no way trying to diminish Jon's accomplishments, so like,
Dana uses the classic Redditor argument I was talking about. If you disagree with me, you must be stupid.
Jon Jones is ranked number 3 pound for pound in the world. Most fucking ridiculous, embarrassing, stupid, know nothing about fighting ranking of all time. To have anybody above John Jones right now just goes to show that you know absolutely nothing. It's undebatable. Anybody who even tries to debate this with me, you're just hating on John Jones and you don't like him as a person.
Which is hilarious because when he makes these arguments, he doesn't even understand what pound for pound means. This is not about career achievements. It's about what have you done for me lately. And John Jones' last win was March of 2023. Dana is putting John Jones against Stipe Miocic, the guy who beat Francis, but was also brutally knocked out by him and hasn't fought since. This was in 2020, by the way. By the time this fight was scheduled to happen, John will not have fought for 623 days, and Stipe will not have fought for 1,331 days. But Dana claims this is the fight the fans want to see. But when the fans say literally nobody cares about this fight, Dana says you guys don't know what you're talking about. The reason nobody cares about this fight is because Stipe is not the biggest challenge to John Jones. Stipe is an old man. Almost everyone agrees that this is a layup fight for John Jones. Both of these guys have claimed they're going to retire after this fight, so why does Dana continue to glaze John Jones so hard to the point it's embarrassing? I mean, just watch this video.
Jan Blachowicz refractor. Ooh, John Jones.
That's badass. That's a shot. Badass. Look at that card.
That's a very special card.
It's like the king.
That's nasty. Greatest fighter in the world.
We got a John Jones card that looks like a king. Are you kidding me right now?
I get it. He's a promoter. But at the same time, he's shitting on his current champions and stars for the benefit of a guy who has continuously fucked the UFC over and is going to retire after this next fight.
Is this your retirement fight in November, or no, you got more?
It's going to be the last time.
It's going to be the last time? Hey, you're a legend. Hey.
Now, Dana White has many bad habits, as do I. And what I've noticed about bad habits is sometimes it isn't the actual thing itself that's the hard part of getting rid of them, but the ritual of it. For example, I used to vape while I was editing videos and it kind of became second nature. It was just something I did every time I edited, even if I knew it was super bad for me. But that's when I discovered Fume. It's a super sick alternative that lets you keep the ritual and feeling of your bad habit without all the guilt that comes with doing something you kind of know you shouldn't be doing. I honestly love Fume and I'm super excited to finally be working with them. Basically, it's a flavored air device that's completely smoke, nicotine, and vapor free, but still gives you that satisfaction of fidgeting. For me, it became something to reach for while I was working, and honestly, I don't even notice the difference anymore. They also have some sick flavors. My personal favorites are orange vanilla and cinnamon hearts, but if that's not your thing, they have tons of other ones. Now be honest with me right now. Have you ever wanted to run a vape over with a tank, shoot it 16 times, and then light it on fire? If this fantasy interests you, then Fume is just what you need. The way I explain it to people is to look at vaping like a high sugar, sticky soda, and Fume as more of a herbal tea. So for the holidays, you can give the gift of better habits with Fume. Check out my link at tryfume.com/ghostscum and use code GHOSTSCUM, all caps, to get a free Fume topper when you order a journey pack. It's the perfect addition to make your gift a little more special, and if you're lucky and watching this video and this ad, you could win one of Fume's limited edition gold-plated devices for the holiday season. Again, that's tryfume.com/ghostscum, or you can just scan the QR code on screen to grab yours now and make someone's holiday unforgettable. There's been some speculation on why this glazing campaign is being done, because in the years of Dana White being president, he's never slobbed on someone this hard, especially at the expense of his future stars. The first theory, popularized by the MMA guru, is that John Jones has some sort of blackmail on Dana. While there's no proof to this, it certainly could be possible, I guess.
John Jones has never lost a fight. Put two guys in a room, and who fucking comes out? John Jones walks out of that fucking room every time. Right now, in Islam, I love you, Islam, and everything. The fact that John Jones is number 2 on the pound for pound list is fucking, it just goes to show how fucking stupid. The media votes on that.
Yeah.
They know nothing about this fucking sport. John Jones has never lost a fight, ever. Jones has like German Shepherd dogs that do all the attack shit, shoots guns. John Jones has a very fucking dark side to him, right? And when you talk about who the baddest motherfucker in the world is,
I like how your example of how bad he is.
You put
his two dogs.
I'm just telling you, John Jones during the craziness.
Of all the things that he has.
Occam's razor says Dana gave John Jones way too big of a contract and therefore needs this fight to sell like crazy. Extremely short-sighted because he's burying his other stars, but also possible. Logically, the reason might be to get on John Jones' good side to keep him around.
You joked before that politics is way nastier than sports or the UFC, but what we're seeing, I mean, there's a labeling of the vice president as a DEI hire. You yourself have prided yourself on giving both men and women opportunities at your organization. What do you think of this message that attacks the race and gender of an opponent?
John Jones is ranked number 3 pound for pound in the world. Most fucking ridiculous, embarrassing, stupid, know nothing about fucking fighting.
John has said he's going to retire, but Dana has pitter-pattered around the topic when he's been asked about it. There's also the theory that because the lineal UFC heavyweight champion is technically still Francis Ngannou, Dana wants John Jones to beat the greatest heavyweight ever, even if he's an old man that hasn't fought in 5 years. Just so that they can say John Jones would have destroyed Francis Ngannou, which isn't necessarily true. It's like if an in-their-prime basketball player took on a legend who was 80 years old. Despite all of this, I think I know the exact reason Dana is promoting John Jones. It's because Dana and the UFC are greedy motherfuckers and want all the money. That part is not in dispute. So why is Dana on a public humiliation tour on behalf of John Jones? Dana has publicly expressed his approval of John Jones multiple times, and he's shit on all-time great fighters if it doesn't benefit his business. In fact, in leaked text messages, albeit from 10 years ago, Dana was absolutely shitting on John Jones behind the scenes. I think Dana is bigging up John Jones because he doesn't want to let John know how much negotiating power he has. Mark my words, the UFC want John to fight Stipe, then as soon as that fight finishes, they're going to pressure the winner, which will almost certainly be John Jones, but I hope I'm wrong, to fight Tom Aspinall. Tom Aspinall is the interim heavyweight champion, and given how talented he is, it's a crime that he's not fighting the quote-unquote real heavyweight champion, although a lot of people consider Tom Aspinall the real heavyweight champion. The problem is, John Jones isn't in one of those predatory UFC contracts, and he doesn't need to fight for money. He claims he's getting $15 million for his next fight, in which he's going to retire after. If that's true, it's hard to see a world where John doesn't hang up the gloves, because that would be a UFC record by far. But if Dana bigs him up constantly, gets him on good terms with the UFC, maybe Dana can convince him to take the Aspinall fight, that would make the contract he gave him a little bit more worth it. Does this justify Dana's humiliation Glazing world tour? Probably not, because at the end of the day, John Jones can just walk away, and then all of this glazing was for one fight.
The craziness.
Of all the things that he has. He's got German Shepherds. This guy's but he's
that guy. German Shepherds. You know what I mean? He's that fucking guy. He's not just fucking like...
The UFC is getting extremely greedy, and if they played it safe, they could have given us the fight people actually want, in John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, not John Jones versus a senior citizen. And unfortunately, the guy who suffers the most from this situation is, in many people's opinion, the greatest heavyweight on the planet. And if you're telling me the UFC will give John an easy fight, then pressure him to not fight again, I have a bridge to sell you.
What's the question?
Do you want to see the winner fight Tom?
The winner should absolutely fight Tom.
That is free money for the UFC going to waste. And I think it's only a matter of time until Dana changes his tune, based on where the money goes. The UFC doesn't care if you're a steroid cheat, drug abuser, or criminal, but they do care if you attempt to negotiate better rights for fighters, like Francis Ngannou did. In fact, they don't even care if you beat your wife. In 2014, Ray Rice got charged for brutally assaulting his girlfriend. In response, Dana White said, "There's one thing you never bounce back from, and that's putting your hands on a woman. Been that way in the UFC since we started here. You don't bounce back from putting your hands on a woman." This is another one of Dana's untruths, because Dana White himself was caught on video slapping his wife. Clearly, we have to hold this man accountable based on his own words. This isn't something you bounce back from. So he hosted a press conference and took softball questions from reporters about the incident. Why would Dana care about John Jones beating his wife when he's done the same thing? It's been over a year and a half since this incident, and nothing has happened. No repercussions, no backlash. In fact, most people forgot about it. Even if we're ignoring the whole cancel culture, whatever, This dude is a massive hypocrite. He said you don't bounce back from hitting a woman, yet that's exactly what him and his butt buddy Jon Jones did. Now, to slap your wife while being the CEO of a company is crazy. But imagine starting a slap freak show fighting league literally right after this. With all this talk about slapping, it's got me thinking about the biggest, best, and most popular sports league in the world. Or a better description might be a joke that got way too out of hand: power slap. You see, in the last 5 years or so, slap fighting became sort of an internet phenomenon. But much to Dana White's misunderstanding, the technique and skill of slapping is not the main draw.
There's actually technique to this thing, believe it or not.
It's the spectacle and stupidity of it. A slap might evoke an image of something like this, something that can be humiliating, humorous, or even a response to disgust. In reality, it's much more devastating. While it is technically against the rules in power slap, a lot of these people hit with the base of their palm. Now right now, just feel how hard the base of your palm is. While it's not like punching someone, it is absolutely still a haymaker. Another rule in power slap is you can't defend yourself at all. You can't even flinch.
Foul! Flinching!
Oh, they call another flinching
foul! Flinching!
So basically, it's who can get hit in the head the most without getting knocked out. I don't have to explain why this is fucking insane. Now, the average power slap defender, or I guess just Dana White, will say, well, isn't that the same as MMA or boxing? No, not at all. Sure, these sports have a high risk of brain damage, maybe even guaranteed if you do it for long enough, but you can actually defend yourself in these sports. There are MMA fighters and boxers who almost never get hit clean. There's also a saying in both these sports that when your chin goes, you go. Meaning, when you finally get knocked out bad, it becomes easier to get knocked out again. So in slapping, the career is somehow even shorter than the most reckless of MMA fighters and boxers. And in both boxing and MMA, you can adopt a defensive style to prevent as much damage as possible. Someone like Floyd Mayweather in boxing, or guys like Sean Strickland in MMA. Both have extremely defensively sound styles that prevent them from getting hit as much. You cannot do this in power slap. It's basically how hard your head is, something you can't even control, is your defense. Dana White claims power slap is a $750 million business, which is why they can only pay the fighters $5,000 to show up and $5,000 to win. Realistically, most of that money goes to paying influencers like Sneeko to show up to their events. 5 to 10 grand for permanent brain damage? Where do I sign up? Now, these pay figures were originally estimated to be less than the UFC. A quote from an ex-UFC fighter, Eric Spicely, said he was offered only $2,000 to show up and $2,000 to win. So if you show up, get brutally knocked out, and have brain damage for the rest of your life, you'll at least get a payout of $2,000. And the brain damage is basically guaranteed, with over half of the contestants showing visible signs of brain damage after participating. Keep in mind, just because someone doesn't get knocked unconscious doesn't mean they don't have brain damage. The risk versus reward here is basically nothing. You can become a multi-millionaire in boxing if you're good enough. It's way harder in the UFC, but it's still possible. With power slap, you make less money, have basically no chance of being famous, and have a way higher risk of serious brain injury. Who the fuck would ever sign up for this? Well, if you could guess, exploitable, desperate people with sad lives.
Anyone walking in off the street, as long as they passed a medical and appeared sober, could be a slap fighter. And this is reflected in the cast of Power Slap. Within the opening minutes of episode 2, when we get to know these people, there are tales of familial breakups, addiction, bankruptcy, and last chances.
I even fought to be clean for a year and a half, bro.
But Dana and power slap defenders will say if people sign up for it, they know what they're getting into. Yet the people who sign up for it haven't exactly dreamed of becoming a power slap champion their whole lives. It's usually people down on their luck looking to make some quick money, not highly skilled athletes like the UFC. All this is displayed through the power slap reality TV show Road to the Title, which is a power slap spin-off of the UFC reality show The Ultimate Fighter, which you might have heard of.
To be honest, dude, I belong with Napoleon, dog, Alexander, dude, Hitler. That's what I belong with, dog. Put me back in the BC times and DC times, whatever, you know, back in the day. Put me back in the day, dog. Expose myself to the masses, blazing to the masses, you know what I mean? Boom. I'll be conquering, dude, period. You know what I mean? Pillaging.
I'm done. You done? Yeah. Are you done? Yeah. No more.
While The Ultimate Fighter can be entertaining, funny, and suspenseful, Road to the Title is depressing. Stories of broken homes, substance abuse, and trauma, yet weirdly enough, this is the most substantive part of the entire show. Like The Ultimate Fighter, Road to the Title is a 50-minute reality TV show. But unlike The Ultimate Fighter, you don't get to watch aspiring fighters compete to achieve their dreams. In Power Slap, you get to watch disenfranchised people lift weights, train slapping somehow, and get knocked out for 50 minutes. But we gotta think like Dana.
You're a drunken retard too.
Remove all ethics from it and focus on the money. If you take Dana at his word, Power Slap is the most lucrative thing on the entire planet.
The deal that I just cut for Slap is bigger than the UFC deal we cut with Spike TV after the first season of The Ultimate Fighter. I don't give a shit what the media says about it. They don't matter.
Well, yeah.
It's fucking unbelievable. Not only is it unbelievable money-wise, it's been unbelievable as far as social media goes.
In fact, it's so successful, it was canned by TBS after one season when the views plummeted. It is now free to stream, not on YouTube, but Rumble. Clearly this is good though, right? Because just listen to Dana, okay? I can't explain it, but he can.
I said it, go back, and some of you were there and heard me in the early days. I said this will be the biggest sport in the world. This will be bigger than the UFC. Now you can remember I said that. Everybody will be like, oh, he's a fucking nut, and all that shit, and then I'll see you in a few years, and we'll talk again.
Dana claims it has more followers than every professional sports team.
We're number one in all of sports, and when I say all of sports, if you take the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, F1, WWE, and who am I forgetting, and added them all together, their numbers don't compare to Slap's. We have more followers than every single professional sport. Every professional sports team, we have more followers than them.
Okay, well let's compare Power Slap to Real Madrid then, the most followed sports team in the world.
Wow. More than like Real Madrid or like these soccer teams?
I don't know about the soccer teams, but I would say yes.
Well, Dana said he didn't have the numbers for soccer, even though that definitely counts, but let's just assume he left out the American part of sports. What about the Lakers? The Warriors? Okay, so that's not true either. According to my calculations, it does have more followers than any hockey or baseball team. It's just such a weird thing to say because it's not true. What you're saying is literally disprovable in 30 seconds. Like, Dana, we can see it. This is a very misleading comparison because Power Slap is an entire league. Comparing it to one team isn't really fair. So how does it compare to the other leagues? According to Dana, they blow them all out of the water. Personally, I would love to see those numbers because from what I've seen, they actually have less followers than any other league. And even if you don't combine them, Power Slap has 1/10 of the total views that the NFL does. This has to be some sort of cherry-picked statistic, or somebody, whether it be Dana or someone on his team, are lying. Dana has been so emboldened by yes men that he can get up on stage and say things that are obviously untrue to anybody watching, but no one ever calls him out on it. Now, we can't go on stage and say it's failing, obviously, but there is a place between shitting on your own product and lying so badly people start laughing at you. Knowing Dana in his echo chamber, he's probably paid someone to tell him what he wanted to hear. And this is far from the only insane thing Dana has said about Power Slap. You thought the UFC lies were bad? The Power Slap lies are like John Jones after a weekend in the mountains taking special supplements. If you're going to be extremely generous, you could say it's impressive that they managed to build this following in less than 2 years, although they did have the UFC's help by using their channel to promote it, making everyone pissed off in the comments. They also get tons of views on YouTube Shorts, which anybody who makes YouTube Shorts will tell you they make no money. You could also say it's a brain damage speedrun taking advantage of vulnerable people. And to anybody outside of the situation, basically the sport in every conceivable way, whether it be the financials, the technicality, or fan approval, is inferior to the UFC. But Dana says it'll be bigger than the UFC. And I think this Jelk boy here puts him in his place.
I know. And I said this before, and I'm going to say it again right now. This will be bigger than the UFC.
No chance. That's how can you have something that is, when I'm as an average person that turns on the TV and I watch Power Slap, I'll tell you what I do. Okay, I watch match 1 and it's the same. I watch match 2, it's the same. I watch match 3, it's the same. And I watch 4, it's the same. Somebody gets slapped in the face and they're done. That's it.
Tell me what's the same about each match you watch.
Somebody raises their right hand, they then make direct contact with somebody's face, and then somebody either falls or they don't. That's it.
It's clear by this that Dana doesn't really understand the internet, and it's not the first time he's failed to understand how the online world works. As we've seen, Dana is the type of guy to say something with complete authority even if he is 100% factually incorrect. But despite all the power slap number nonsense today, Dana was actually a super early adapter of the internet. He even used it back before it was super mainstream to document the behind the scenes of UFC events.
So this is the first video blog for this week. Obviously, I haven't done anything today except meetings and all the crap that you guys don't want to see. So we're putting up the last fight, St. Pierre versus Koscheck. Fight week, blog week.
While this is super common today, in fact every single UFC pay-per-view does that, back then it was basically unheard of. Despite being somewhat of an early pioneer of the internet, potentially due to his stubbornness, he's failed to keep up with it. Thankfully, the UFC has hired some good social media people, but for Dana personally, not so much. If he's ever become a meme or blown up in some way, it's usually by accident. Dana was on Instagram Live when he made the mistake of accidentally reading out a message.
I want to oil you up. What the fuck does that mean?
For the next month or so, whenever Dana announced something fans didn't like, every single comment, oil him up, oil this man up, get out the oil. Dana is also prone to bouts of rage, which can lead to some hilarious moments like when he ranted about Oscar De La Hoya.
He's concerned about Alexander Volkanovski, okay? Before we pay $1 in fucking purse money, right? Volkanovski got paid more to wear his UFC Venom kit than Oscar De La Hoya paid the entire fucking fight card.
Or when he gave us this classic quote while ranting about potential fight fixing in other MMA organizations.
That's fucking illegal.
Dana White has no doubt had some goofy moments, like slapping his wife. It's clear he's let the internet pass him by, and to be fair to him, the internet does move at light speed these days. I think part of this is Dana knows what it takes to be successful, but he used those strategies 20 years ago, and the landscape has completely changed since then. His failure to adapt to the modern world has led to some extremely hilarious moments, like when he said he cracked down on illegal streams.
We got him. We're watching this guy right now. All you have to do is turn it on Saturday, and we got you, fucker. I can't wait. Turn it on Saturday, streamers, and see what happens.
Again, maybe this is a situation of him lying or some internal team telling him this to make him happy, or maybe it's him misunderstanding what they're saying, because I've yet to see any consequences for illegal streams by the UFC. The Stream East Twitter account was actually beefing with Dana after he was talking about illegal streams. But how can you blame the people who watch illegally when the prices are insane? Just look at these ticket prices. These aren't even the worst ones. These are the cheapest ones I could find. Even if you want to stay at home and watch it legally, it's $79.99 for a pay-per-view. Plus, if you're in the US, you'll need a subscription to ESPN Plus. And if you want to watch the earlier fights, you'll need a subscription to Fight Pass. That's easily over $100 a month just to watch the UFC pay-per-view events. Dana's tried to break into the influencer scene recently with mixed results. He got in with the Nelk Boys and for some reason has a hard-on for this guy called Steve Will Do It.
I love Steve. Steve's one of the nicest fucking kids.
He's a great guy.
On the planet.
Yes.
He's such a good person.
Who to my understanding is some sort of famous scammer. I think that's who he is.
Now we're going to do a little check-in, because since we last talked about him, he's back to gambling, he's threatening to sue me, and he's created a crypto coin, which he swears he didn't rug. He swears it was some of his friends, the nerds, he calls them.
That's a double chunk chocolate cookie.
Celebrities also get free tickets to Power Slap all the time, making the event seem buzzing online, but in reality, there's no way they could sell out an actual arena. Dana would rather gamble with random streamers and brag about winning hundreds of thousands of dollars than offer that money to fighters. But again, maybe that's just the business side of it. The less the fighters make, the less negotiating power they have, meaning the UFC can force them to take fights they otherwise might not have and put them in a shitty position. So why would you pay them more? Better question, have we answered the thesis of this video? Is Dana White a good guy, bad guy, or just a businessman? I think there's an idea of Dana White, but not a physical embodiment of Dana White. Is the man who went into a rage-induced stroke a bad guy? I don't know, honestly. It's hard to say. If you asked his mother, she'd say, yeah, he's a bad guy. But also, it's clear the relationship has deteriorated and maybe she's not exactly an unbiased example.
My parents taught me a lot about what I didn't want to be as a parent, and yeah. And I don't really talk about, I don't think I've ever talked about this, but my parents both died recently. So,
If you ask the people in his close circle, they'll say he's a great guy. I think Dana White is simply an American businessman who's been consumed by the rot of the system, a man only motivated by greed and money. This is why he feels so comfortable lying, double-crossing, and scheming at the expense of other people. He's just playing the game how it's supposed to be played. Ruthless, cutthroat, and with no friends. But you could also argue, to be this successful, you have to be brutal. And say what you want about Dana, you cannot deny his success. It's easy to hate on Dana White because he can be a scumbag. But also, he's the product of a machine that is working as intended. Is money the only virtue? To Dana, yeah. But for a happy, long life built with meaningful connections, I don't think so. But what do I know? I'm an idiot. All I know for sure is Power Slap is the biggest sport ever. Jon Jones is the pound for pound greatest fighter ever. And if you put Dana and Jon Jones in a room, Dana walks out of that room covered in Jon Jones.
the reigning, defending, 155-pound champion of the UFC, the notorious Conor McGregor!
Did I mention to you guys that Jon Jones is the greatest of all time?
Is Jon Jones the pound for pound GOAT?
He's the pound for pound best fighter in the world, and he's the GOAT. And you all know this. Numbers don't lie.
Does he have pictures of you?